Tobias Merrick had seen 300 storms roll across the Kestrel 9 Badlands, but this one moved like it had teeth. The agricultural dome rattled on its moorings as red dust turned the afternoon sky into something that belonged on a different, angrier world. He finished securing the last hydroponic tank, just as the emergency klaxons began their low wail. The settlement called it dust season, though that name made it sound temporary. On Kestrel 9, the storms lasted weeks, carving new canyons and burying old mistakes under layers of oxidized sand. Tobias pulled his breather mask tight and checked the dome seals one final time. Everything had to hold. Out here, 40 kilometers from the nearest mining outpost, help came slow if it came at all. That's when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to wind or machinery, high-pitched, rhythmic, desperate. It cut through the storm's roar like a blade, through silk. Tobias pressed his ear against the dome's outer wall. There it was again. Not one voice, but several. Crying. No. Calling. The sound scraped against something deep in his chest, the part that remembered raising livestock back on Earth before the colony ships left orbit. He shouldn't go out there. The storm would strip flesh from bone in minutes. But the sound came. Again, weaker this time. And Tobias found himself pulling on his heavy weather suit before common sense could argue. The airlock groaned as he forced it open against the wind pressure. Sand hit him like a wall of needles, even through the reinforced fabric. Visibility dropped to arm's length. He followed the sound by instinct, one hand trailing along the dome's curved exterior, boots fighting for purchase on ground that had turned to liquid dust. The crevice opened up without warning. His boot went through empty air and he caught himself on an outcropping, heart hammering. Below, in a natural shelter formed by collapsed mining equipment and twisted metal, he saw them, 6 shapes huddled together in the fading light. Pale scales caught the last rays of sun breaking through the storm. Wings folded tight against small bodies. Eyes that reflected his headlamp with an otherworldly gleam. Dragons. Actual living dragons. Hatchlings, from the look of them. No bigger than farming dogs shivering in a pile of abandoned fear. Tobias had heard the rumors. Mining crews whispered about nests in the deep canyons, about creatures that had evolved in Kestrel 9's volcanic heart. Corporate called them dangerous, unauthorized life forms. They posted bounties for nests destroyed, eggs crushed. But looking at these 6 terrified babies, all Tobias saw were creatures that someone had left to die. The storm intensified. He had minutes before the winds hit full force. He dropped into the crevice, landing hard on his knees. The hatchlings scattered back, making sounds that could have been hisses or pleas. One stood forward, scales rippling with colors that shifted, from copper to deep blue, protecting the others. Brave little thing. Tobias moved slow, hands visible, making the low sounds he used to calm spooked animals. The protective one watched him with eyes too intelligent for comfort. Then it did something that stopped his breath. It lowered its head and stepped aside. Permission. Trust offered on the edge of death. He gathered them carefully, feeling their rapid heartbeats against his chest as he bundled them into his coat. They weighed almost nothing. Too light. Starving. Their scales felt like warm glass, delicate and strong at once. One nuzzled against his collar, making a sound like wind chimes in a breeze. The climb back up nearly killed him. The storm had swallowed the world whole. He navigated by memory and desperation, the bundle of dragons pressed against his chest like a second heartbeat. When his hands finally found the airlock handle, he could have wept. Inside the dome, silence felt like a luxury. The hatchlings stirred in his arms, 6 heads emerging from his coat to look around at the warm, still air, at the rows of green plants, at safety. Tobias carried them to the maintenance barn where he kept supplies and equipment. He cleared a space near the heating unit, laying down emergency blankets and checking each dragon for injuries, cuts, bruises, signs of rough handling. Someone had stuffed them in that crevice deliberately, left them to die or be buried by the storm. The copper-blue one met his eyes again. In that gaze, Tobias saw understanding. These creatures knew exactly what had almost happened to them. He mixed a protein solution from his emergency rations, testing, The temperature against his wrist the way he'd done for orphaned calves a lifetime ago. The dragons learned to drink from the bottle faster than any earth animal he'd known. Smart, adaptable, survivors. As the storm raged outside and 6 small dragons fell asleep in a nest of blankets, Tobias Merrick made a decision that would change everything. Whatever happened next, whoever came looking, these 6 were under his protection now. Some promises you make without words. This was one of them. Morning light filtered through the dome's reinforced panels, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. Tobias woke to the feeling of weight on his chest and opened his eyes to find 6 pairs of dragon eyes staring down at him with unblinking curiosity. The copper-blue one sat directly on his sternum, head tilted like it was studying a particularly interesting rock formation. "Well, good morning to you too," Tobias muttered, sitting up slowly. The dragon scrambled off him with surprising grace, landing in a semicircle that felt distinctly like an audience waiting for a performance. Feeding time became an education in patience. Each dragon had different preferences, different rhythms. The copper-blue one, who Tobias started calling Ember, for the way its scales caught light like dying coals, ate with focused intensity. It never looked away from the bottle, never got distracted, consumed every drop like fuel for some internal fire. The smallest, barely larger than his boot, had scales that shifted between silver and pearl white. This one hesitated before each swallow, tasting the air around the bottle as if checking for poison. Careful, cautious. Tobias named it Whisper for the soft sounds it made, barely audible even in the barn's quiet. A stocky dragon with scales the color of storm clouds muscled its way forward, shoving past the others with blunt determination. Storm, Tobias decided. This one ate like it was in competition with itself, gulping down nutrition with single-minded purpose. 2 dragons, nearly identical except for subtle color variations, moved in perfect synchronization. One had ash-gray scales, the other slightly darker, like charcoal. They ate together, slept together, even breathed in rhythm. Ash and Cobalt, he named them, watching how they never strayed more than a few feet apart. The last dragon hung back, observing from the edge of the group. Its scales held a quality of dawn light, pale gold with hints of rose. It approached the bottle last, only after the others had finished, and drank with an elegance the others lacked. Dawn seemed appropriate for something that waited for its turn with such quiet dignity. By the 3rd day, they'd learned his schedule. When Tobias entered the barn at sunrise, 6 heads popped up from their nest in perfect sequence. When he worked in the greenhouse, checking nutrient levels and adjusting growth lamps, he'd turn to find them pressed against the connecting window, watching every movement. They grew fast. Impossibly fast. What should have taken weeks happened in days. Their scales hardened, taking on deeper colors. Their wings, crumpled and weak that first night, now stretched and folded with proper articulation. Ember's copper tones deepened to bronze. Storm's gray became slate-threaded with silver. Whisper's pale scales developed an iridescent quality that made them hard to focus on directly. But it was their abilities that truly amazed him. Tobias first noticed when Ember sneezed, and a spark jumped from its nostril to the metal, feeding bowl with a sharp crack. The dragon froze, looking as surprised as Tobias felt. Then it did something that looked distinctly like a grin and sneezed again, producing another small arc of what could only be electricity. Storm discovered its gift during a pressure change that made the dome groan. The dragon lifted its head and hummed, a deep, resonant sound that made the air vibrate. The groaning stopped. Storm hummed again, adjusting pitch, and Tobias swore he saw the metal support shift slightly, settling into more stable positions. Whisper vanished, just gone in the middle of the barn floor while Tobias was cleaning their nest. He called out, increasingly worried, until movement in the corner of his eye made him turn. Whisper sat exactly where it had been, scales rippling with distortion like heat waves. Not invisible, but camouflaged so perfectly it had blended with the straw and shadows. Ash and Cobalt demonstrated their gift together, as they did everything. Ash exhaled a fine mist that hung in the air, and Cobalt breathed through it, creating shapes and patterns that held form for several heartbeats before dissolving. Communication, Tobias realized. They were speaking to each other in clouds and patterns. Dawn's ability manifested last and most dramatically. The dragon had been watching Tobias repair a cracked irrigation line when it stepped forward and pressed one claw against the damaged section. Light spread from the contact point, warm and golden, and when Dawn stepped back, the crack had sealed. Not just patched, but healed, as if the plastic had remembered its original form. Tobias sat down hard on a supply crate, mind racing. These weren't just animals. They were something more. Something that explained why. Corporate wanted them destroyed before anyone could ask difficult questions about what else might be living in Kestrel 9's. Unexplored territories, the dragons gathered around him as he processed this revelation. Ember climbed onto his knee. Storm pressed against his left side. Dawn settled by his right boot. Whisper materialized on his shoulder, having apparently been there the whole time. Ash and Cobalt formed bookends at his feet. They trusted him completely. He could feel it in how they relaxed in his presence, how they turned to him when startled, how they followed him through his daily routines like he was the fixed point in their universe. That night, Tobias set up sleeping quarters in the barn instead of returning to his small habitat module. The dragons needed consistency, needed to know he wouldn't disappear. He dragged in a cot and some blankets, arranged them near the heating unit. The dragons investigated his new sleeping spot with great interest. Ember claimed the foot of the cot immediately. Storm curled up underneath, apparently enjoying the enclosed space. Dawn settled beside Tobias's pillow. Whisper found a spot in the blanket folds. Ash and Cobalt created a two-dragon barrier at the cot's edge, on guard even in sleep. As Tobias lay there, surrounded by the soft sounds of dragon breathing and the occasional contented chirp, he realized something profound had shifted. He'd come to Kestrel 9 to escape, to put distance between himself and a life that had fallen apart back on Earth, to farm in peace and ask nothing from the universe except to be left alone. But these 6 creatures had given him something he hadn't known he'd lost: purpose beyond survival, connection beyond utility, a reason to wake up that had nothing to do with duty and everything to do with want. Ember's scales flickered with bioluminescent patterns in the darkness, like embers breathing in a banked fire. The others responded with their own subtle glows, blues and silvers and golds creating a constellation across the barn floor. Tobias smiled in the dark and let himself hope that tomorrow would be as simple as today, that they could have more mornings of feeding time and afternoons of discovery, that the universe would grant them this small mercy. He should have known better. Hope on colony worlds had a way of attracting attention. The transport ship arrived on the 14th day, cutting through Kestrel 9's rust-colored sky like a blade through fabric. Tobias saw it from the greenhouse, a corporate security vessel with the angular design that meant business, not freight. His stomach dropped. The dragons sensed his tension immediately. Ember's scales flickered with warning colors. Storm's low hum took on an edge that made the dome supports vibrate with unease. Whisper disappeared entirely, though Tobias could feel the dragon's presence near his left ankle. Ash and Cobalt pressed together, creating that missed communication that looked like urgent conversation. Dawn moved to the window, watching the ship's descent with unsettling focus. Tobias had maybe 20 minutes before they landed. He gathered the dragons quickly, herding them into the barn's back storage room. "Stay quiet," he whispered, knowing they understood tone if not words. "Stay hidden, please." Ember's eyes met his, and Tobias saw the intelligence there process his fear and make calculations. The dragon chirped once, soft and low. The others responded, settling into stillness that felt more like readiness than calm. He sealed the storage room and walked out to meet whoever was coming, the woman who emerged from the transport war, corporate security black with efficiency built into every movement. She was maybe 40, with iron gray hair pulled back tight and eyes that evaluated everything they touched. 2 armed guards flanked her, but she walked ahead with the confidence of someone who'd never needed backup. "Tobias Merrick?" Her voice carried across the landing pad without being raised. "That's me." He kept his hands visible, his posture open. "Can I help you with something?" "CN Avance, Kestrel 9 Corporate Security. We're conducting surveys of unauthorized biological activity in the agricultural zones." She pulled out a handheld scanner, already reading. "Your dome's showing some interesting energy signatures. Mind if we take a look around?" It wasn't really a question. Tobias led them inside, mind racing through options. The storage room was shielded, built to protect sensitive equipment from electromagnetic interference. The scanner might not pick up the dragons immediately. Might buy him time to think. Vance walked through his greenhouse with the systematic attention of someone trained to find what didn't belong. She paused at the hydroponic tanks, noting the higher-than-normal protein synthesis in the nutrient solution, stopped at the barn entrance, head tilting at something her scanner reported. "You've got heat signatures that don't match standard equipment." She looked at him directly. 6 of them, moving. Tobias felt his throat go dry. Could be a sensor malfunction. The storm 2 weeks back damaged a lot of systems. Could be. Vance didn't believe him. "Or you could save us both time and show me what you're hiding." The silence stretched between them like wire pulled taut. Tobias thought about lying, about denying, about all the ways this could go wrong. Then he thought about 6 pairs of eyes watching him from the dark, trusting him to make the right choice. "If I show you," he said carefully, "I need your word that you'll hear me out before making any decisions." Vance studied him for a long moment. Whatever she saw in his face made her nod once, sharp and binding. "You have 5 minutes." He led them to the storage room and opened the door. 6 dragons looked up at the intruders with expressions ranging from fear to defiance. Ember stood forward, electricity crackling faintly along its scales. Storm's hum dropped to a frequency that made everyone's teeth ache. Dawn's scales brightened, preparing to heal or defend. Whisper became a ghost in the shadows. Ash and Cobalt created a wall of obscuring mist between the dragons and the guards. One guard reached for his weapon. Vance stopped him with a raised hand, her eyes locked on the dragons. "Unauthorized xenofauna," she said quietly. "Class 3 intelligence markers. Undocumented abilities." She looked at Tobias. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I saved them." His voice came out harder than intended. "Someone dumped them in a crevice during the storm. Left them to die. I found them and I brought them here because it was the right thing to do." "The right thing." Vance's laugh held no humor. "These creatures are why we have containment protocols. Why we survey and document before colonization. They're not pets, Merrick. They're evidence of a native intelligence that should have been reported immediately. So you could kill them?" Tobias stepped between Vance and the dragons. "That's what corporate does with complications. I've seen the reports. Nests destroyed, eggs terminated, entire species wiped out before they can interfere with mining operations. We protect human interests." But something in Vance's voice had shifted, like she was reciting policy rather than belief. "They're children." Tobias gestured to the dragons. "Look at them. Really look. They're scared and young and they've done nothing except survive. That's not a threat. That's life trying to continue." Vance was quiet for a long time, her scanner still running, data flowing across its screen. The guards waited for orders. The dragons waited for judgment. Tobias waited for his world to end. Then Vance did something unexpected. She crouched down, slowly, hands visible and empty. Ember watched her approach with crackling suspicion. She stopped just outside striking range and spoke, not to Tobias but to the dragon. "You're the protective one," she said softly.
"The leader."
"I can see it in how you stand." Ember's scales flickered, processing this new variable. "I had a daughter once," Vance continued, her professional mask cracking slightly. "She wanted to work with animals, xenobiology, before the accident." She paused, something raw crossing her face. "She would have loved to meet you." The moment hung suspended. Then Dawn moved, stepping past Ember's defensive position with that characteristic grace. The dragon approached Vance and gently touched one claw to her extended hand. Light spread from the contact, warm and golden, and when Dawn stepped back, Tobias saw tears on Vance's face. "They healed an old fracture," she whispered, flexing her hand with wonder. "I've had pain there for 3 years." She stood slowly, composing herself, but something fundamental had changed in her expression. She turned to her guards. "Preliminary survey shows no biological threats. Recommend continued monitoring by local agricultural specialist." She met Tobias's eyes. "That would be you, ma'am." One guard looked confused. "The protocols clearly state." "I'm aware of the protocols." Vance's voice regained its edge. "I'm also aware that my report determines threat level, and I'm determining these creatures pose no immediate danger to colonial operations. They'll remain under quarantine observation here. I'll file the paperwork." She pulled out a data pad, fingers moving quickly. "You'll need to maintain detailed records. Growth rates, behavioral patterns, any unusual abilities. Monthly reports to my office. Any sign of aggression or public exposure, and this agreement is void." "Understood?" Tobias felt something loosen in his chest. Understood. Good. Vance finished her notes and looked at the dragons one more time. Keep them safe, Merrick. And keep them secret. Not everyone in corporate thinks like I do. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. That storm that came through 2 weeks ago? It wasn't natural. Survey teams reported deliberate nest destruction in the canyon systems. Someone's clearing out the dragon population systematically. Her expression hardened, which means someone with resources wants these creatures gone. You're not just protecting them from policy, you're protecting them from something worse. The transport lifted off 10 minutes later, leaving Tobias standing in the landing pad dust with 6 dragons emerging from the barn to join him. They formed their usual pattern around him, a constellation of trust and dependence. Ember climbed onto his shoulder, heavier now than that first night. Storm pressed against his leg, humming contentment. Whisper materialized on his other shoulder, perfectly balanced. Dawn settled at his feet, glowing softly in the afternoon light. Ash and cobalt wove between his boots, leaving trails of artistic mist. Tobias looked out at the Badlands, at the endless red dust and distant canyons where more dragons might be hiding, might be dying, might be waiting for someone to choose protection over profit. He'd come to Kestrel 9 to escape his past. Instead, he'd found his future. 6 futures, actually, each one scaled and winged and impossibly precious. All right, he said to his small family, let's go home. The dragons followed him back into the dome, into safety, into whatever came next. Together. Some choices you make without knowing their full weight. This was one of them. And Tobias Merrick discovered he could carry it just fine.